The miracle of the origin of life from one cell. Many are formed, first identically, and then they acquire individual characteristics. Some will become the heart, others will become the brain, the third with these little hands. A beautiful process is true. And now let's fast forward. This is the ending of the story after death. We have hidden the details because we know that most of you, and even by the YouTube algorithm and these frames, will be unpleasant. Let's better replace the person with fruit. No, it still looks ugly. No one ever says such a phrase, amazing beauty decomposition. But why are we so unhappy to look at it? Now you will find out how the dead signal to us from underground, where there is a time bomb in your body, what will be left of you 100 years after death, how you can dissolve without a trace in your own bath, why it's good to rot and burning is bad, what kind of job can a dead person get, how much does it cost to die, why lying in a coffin can be more interesting than your entire previous life, and why everything is wrong with cemeteries. I am not eternal, and neither are you. Each of you, including me, will die someday and will not return to this earth until the day of judgment. But we will remain in the earth. It's also difficult for you to believe that one day you will simply cease to have such an experience. Definitely neither it, nor you have ever had it. And we just, there is nothing to compare what it's like. But I can reassure you, even scientists and doctors are not completely sure what death is in general. For a long time, death was considered to be cardiac and respiratory arrest. But then we learned how to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation and even invented this thing that presses on itself on the chest 100 times a minute and makes the heart pump. So now a straight line on the monitor is not the final death, but clinical death can be canceled. And in some countries, for example, in the United States of America, people themselves can set the rules of the game, decide what kind of death is final for them. Patients can fill in advance. Here is a paper that says, if my heart stops, leave it alone and let me die. And some people write this request right on their body, like here. The tattoo says not to resurrect, and the doctors are confused formally. This cannot be considered the patient's wishes, even if the tattoo looks like this with all the signatures. But why do people do this? Because they want to leave quickly and naturally. Doctors will then resuscitate the patient as many times as they want because they have such a job to bring to life. Even if the patient has not lost touch with reality and is suffering a lot, the doctors will still resuscitate him again and again. After all, 50 years ago, doctors finally decided that brain death should be considered final death. And here opinions diverge. For example, in Great Britain, Canada, and India, they believe that it is not necessary to check the entire brain. It is enough to confirm death with only one part of the brainstem. This is our autopilot. It must constantly support 3 vital functions: heart rate, breathing, and the ability to be conscious. If autopilot damaged, then the person will never wake up again. Even there will be no reflexes left. It will be just the body dependent on life support machines. But how do the doctors understand whether the brainstem has died or not? They just try everything. Do you remember? There was a game called Play on your neighbor's nerves. It's a game of finding the patient's nerve. It causes him severe discomfort, shines a flashlight in his eyes, tickles his throat for a few minutes. They turn off the ventilation of the lungs. There is even a test when the ear is filled with cold water. If the brainstem is alive, then the reflex is triggered and eyes turn towards the ear where the water was poured. If the patient in a coma does not react in any way to all this obscenity, there does not twitch, does not swallow air, does not show any reflexes at all, then most likely the brainstem has completely failed. By the patient is disconnected from the devices. But in most cases, in most countries, including in Russia, reflexes alone are not enough to make sure that the brain does not show any electrical activity. The entire brain is fully examined. It is necessary to stain the blood and see the veins in the head on an X-ray. If the blood does not reach the brain and reaches the nasal area as in this picture, the brain is already dead. Without oxygen, it does not need blood. The time of death can be announced clearly more. But what happens to the body next? In the first hours after the body is left without oxygen, it is almost no different from a living one. Well, externally, this stage is called fresh. The body just turns pale, as if it had been put on cheap Halloween makeup, and begins to cool down by about 1 degree per hour. But the most interesting thing happens inside. The chemical factory that removed everything unnecessary from there has stopped, and now toxic acids accumulate there. They corrode the cell walls from the inside, and the tissues begin to lose water. And at the same time, the body not only lies destroyed, but also moves. The faint of heart. It is generally better not to watch. For the first 6 hours after death, the proteins in the muscle fibers begin to tightly bind together, causing the body to assume a creepy, tense posture. It appears as though the muscles have just received heat and electric shock, rendering them permanently unusable. This means that the possibility of zombies rising from the grave and performing such actions is highly unlikely. But keep in mind, this is just the beginning of the process of decay. Fireworks. After all, each of us has containers with chemical weapons. These organs include the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. While we are alive, these organs secrete or store enzymes that are highly corrosive. Thanks to these enzymes, we are able to digest even fatty chicken. The mucous membranes in our body have a protective mechanism that prevents the breakdown of cells by these enzymes. This mechanism is akin to wearing a chemical protective suit from the inside. However, after death, this protection ceases to work and boom, we're destroyed by our own chemical weapons. Technically, when you die, although the 6 trillion of your body's human cells will cease to function, there are still approximately 30 trillion foreign cells, such as bacteria, remaining inside your body. These cells, primarily bacteria, continue to thrive and multiply because there is no longer immunity and bacteria take over the entire body without a fight. Within just 3 days after death, the bacterial population begins to dominate, especially in the intestines. The bacteria that once aided us in digesting food now digest us, which is both ironic and waste-free. What happens to the body at this time? Firstly, the skin turns green when sulfur begins to react with the blood. Secondly, the body swells until it swells up to about twice its original size. This phase of posthumous life is called bloating. But where does the sulfur come from? Why does the body swell? It is filled with gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide. This is similar to the belching of microbes. Eventually, the body may not withstand the pressure and bursts in several places. Safety coffins were invented, allowing those buried alive to signal for help. These coffins were often triggered by mistake, leading to false alarms when the sound of a bell was heard from the buried body. Running to the cemetery, people would dig up the graves fearing a potential explosion. Similarly, due to the pressure of gases, dead whales can explode, scattering their entrails up to 15 meters. When holes appear in a dead body, new types of microbes enter them from the outside, resulting in a disgusting smell. This smell is caused by the same substances that make your breath smell in the morning. Therefore, the phrase "on board, someone is dead" actually makes sense. If this smell emanates not from your mouth, but from your body, then the odor becomes very strong, attracting insects. These creatures, insects, flock to it. After all, God created them with the ability to sense a corpse 16 kilometers away. With the presence of these insects, the body enters the stage of active decay. Insects follow a distinct schedule in terms of which species fly in to feast on a dead body. They appear in waves, with 8 different types of creatures flocking to the corpse. The first wave consists of fake and indoor flies, which lay eggs on the body to use it as an incubator. Similar to the creatures in the movie Alien, their activity causes the temperature inside the deceased to increase by up to 20 degrees. Within a week, these flies consume nearly 60% of the body, leaving only tough fragments behind. Approximately 3 months later, beetles begin to arrive. After 6 months, various arachnids appear, and even butterflies can seemingly emerge from the stomach. This marks the onset of the late decomposition stage, where the body bids farewell to the true ecosystem. Different groups of insects fulfill specific roles within this ecosystem. The first group scavenges the carrion. The second group preys upon the first, and a third group takes refuge in the decaying matter during inclement weather. There are also vagrant insects, such as rats, that opportunistically take a bite and then depart. It is like a real buffet. Towards the end of the decomposition process, bark beetles come into play. They are so ravenous that they even consume the bones, leaving them impeccably clean. In fact, museums utilize these beetles to clean skeletons for exhibitions. As a result, the final stage begins, the dry skeleton. It's important to note that I haven't included real images of deceased individuals, as that's not our focus here. We strive to provide an understanding of the appearance. There are 5 versions depicting life after death, particularly for children. In the initial stage, the deceased individual appears pale, resembling Dracula from an old movie. The subsequent stage features a greener and more decomposed appearance. The following stage portrays the individual as minced meat, akin to the state of meat left forgotten on a table for a few days. Next, we draw inspiration from a scene in Indiana Jones. Finally, we have the representation of a biological classroom in Kiev. The duration of this entire process varies greatly, depending on numerous factors such as the cause of death, temperature, humidity, and local fauna. But let's imagine that a person died at a very old age from natural causes and was buried in a coffin. What will happen next if the earth is warm and very wet? Within 10 years, all the accumulated fat on the cheeks and the chew on the ass decompose. It turns into wax in 10 years. This is called oily wax. This wax can even be used to make candles if desired. However, if the body is in dry conditions, for example, exposed to heat or frost, then the body turns into a mummy like the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. Remarkably, no bandages or chemicals are required for this transformation. The remaining water simply evaporates through the skin itself. After 50 years, the body becomes completely dry. It can even mummify naturally without any external assistance. There are also other ways in which people can become mummies. I suggest you take a walk around Talon Man, a man who was hanged about 2,300 years ago and thrown into a swamp. His face looks as if he laid down for a nap and is about to wake up. Scientists have discovered many similar swamp mummies, all remarkably well preserved due to the presence of trophy acids and the absence of oxygen. However, let's move away from the swamp and consider what happens in a coffin. Roughly 80 years after burial, only bones, teeth, skin, and some implants will remain. Over time, the bones and skin will start to crumble as the collagen, which acts as a glue in our tissues, is destroyed. Eventually, all that will be left are a few teeth, implants, and maybe a small amount of wax. That's all that remains after 100 years. How do we find the bones of ancient people, considering they have been on the ground for a long time? Brace yourself, because I'm about to blow your mind. Bones of mammoths, ancient people, and dinosaurs have rarely been discovered intact. What we commonly refer to as bones of ancient creatures are actually fossils. The actual body decomposes, and after millions of years, we find a skeletal framework composed of minerals in the form of bones. Tissues containing the remains of ancient creatures are exceptionally rare. Here's an example of an authentic mammoth bone. The reason it has survived is that, from a geological standpoint, it lived just recently. The wool and brain of the mammoth, named Yucca, were found intact because it was preserved in permafrost. While it's possible to find relatively well-preserved mammoths and ancient people, discovering an entirely intact dinosaur is exceedingly rare. Everything is clear, but why do we need to know how the bodies of modern humans decay, and who will benefit from this knowledge? The most important question is why I told you all this. I suppose it's just because I'm really a bad person. In reality, studying the stages of the human body after death helps criminologists understand how long ago a person died. It has evolved into a comprehensive science that benefits society. Let me provide an example. We have thoroughly studied the life cycle of insects, including the exact days of larval hatching and growth. Thanks to this research, we were able to solve a crime that had remained unresolved for 50 years. Here's the case. In 1959, a 14-year-old Canadian named Stephen Outreau Scott was charged with the brutal murder of a girl named Lion Harper. He served a 10-year prison sentence, transitioning from a child to an adult within that period. Fast forward 37 years later, forensic entomologists, the scientists who study insects, further advanced their knowledge. They analyzed photos from the crime scene and, based on the level of larva development on the body, accurately determined that the time of the girl's death down to the exact hour. This breakthrough provided Stephen with an alibi, leading to his acquittal and a compensation of $5 million. However, it's true that no amount of money can bring back lost youth. But here's an interesting question. How do we find out how a body decomposes in various conditions? And are there scientists who dig up graves or keep an eye on the dead? What if I told you that there are places in the world where corpses lie in the open air for years, and people simply observe them? There are several such places, including one on the slopes of Everest. In these locations, it is impossible to evacuate the bodies of deceased climbers because a person can hardly move themselves, leaving the dead on the side of the trail. Over 100 years, more than 300 people have lost their lives here, and there even exists a statistical map documenting these occurrences. And in another location, there are so many corpses that they can be seen, even from a satellite. It's hard to believe and quite scary to witness. Welcome to Freeman in Texas, where we're taking you closer to seeing corpses everywhere, confined in cages. And you'll be surprised to learn that these are real corpses. However, complete law and order is maintained in such establishments. This type of place is called a body farm, and there are about a dozen of them in the world. Here, corpses of all ages and weight categories lie in the sun, underground, or in water, with or without clothes, and have been there for 6 years. But why is all of this necessary? Well, anthropologists and criminologists study post-mortem changes in different bodies under various conditions. For example, they research the transition from a fat person to a skeleton, or when a thin person becomes consumed by living organisms. It is a unique exploration of the journey of the deceased, with observations and information meticulously recorded in a precious diary. And what you've just witnessed is not the entire harvest that can be gathered from body farms. Scientists, with the aid of various techniques, can gather valuable insights by observing a person at the moment of death and studying the changes in their appearance during the process of decomposition. By simulating the process in reverse, criminologists can perform remarkable feats. For example, consider the case of a woman found in Florida with gunshot wounds. Her body had been left for a significant period, making facial identification impossible. However, by applying knowledge from forensic anthropology, experts were able to reconstruct her appearance. They created a 3D copy and meticulously layered muscles, fat, and skin. To enhance accuracy, details from the crime scene, such as glasses, were incorporated. By using a photo robot to capture the result, one of her acquaintances recognized her, ultimately leading to her identification as Jane Weaver. Astonishingly, the investigation revealed that the culprit was her boyfriend. And now all the criminals who are currently watching, please take a seat and hear this. Even time cannot guarantee that a body you abandon in a forest or vacant lot will go unnoticed. What is truly astonishing is that burying it underground won't prevent its detection either. Remarkably, the body releases approximately 30 grams of nitrogen for every kilogram of its weight into the soil, an abundant quantity. Initially, this high nitrogen concentration causes the surrounding vegetation to wither and die. However, after a year, the nitrogen levels decrease, and the area begins to flourish even more due to the remaining nitrogen becoming fertilizer. As a result, the trees surrounding the burial site produce more chlorophyll, showcasing a visibly greener appearance. Interestingly, these subtle transformations might not be noticeable to the naked eye, even upon close inspection. Nonetheless, the ultra-sensitive cameras positioned on surveillance drones can detect anomalies in leaf color among hundreds of ordinary trees and raise alarms. Smokers, rejoice! Your bodies in the forest can be found even faster. While you smoke all your life, your body accumulates a lot of cadmium. This cadmium is absorbed by plants, similar to nitrogen. As a result, the area around the grave undergoes a color change that makes it very easy to find. So, smoking is only useful in one case, posthumously, and it's important to understand that if the investigation is conducted properly, the truth will be revealed. This is because not only the witness but also the birch will snitch on the criminal. A dead body never fully decomposes. It gradually merges with its surrounding environment, leaving traces. Even strong acids are ineffective in destroying these traces. Remember how in the TV series Breaking Bad, corpses were dissolved without a trace using a powerful acid mixture of fluorine and hydrochloric acid. This mixture is capable of corroding glass and many metals. However, it cannot completely dissolve fat and bones. John Haig, a notorious British maniac, employed a classic method instead. He used sulfuric acid to turn the body into a slush within 2 days, which he disposed of in his workshop. Even though the authorities diligently searched the land near his workshop, they still discovered fragments of bones and dentures, providing enough evidence for a death sentence. When it comes to the task of dissolving dead human bodies, acid is not only an unreliable option, but it is also dangerous and very expensive. Consequently, Mexican cartels have turned to a more cost-effective alternative, an alkali solution. According to scientists, if you boil a corpse in sodium hydroxide at a temperature of 300 degrees, it is claimed that after 3 hours, there will be no remaining trace of living tissue. In fact, we do not teach anyone to cover up a crime. This is public information we acquired, and it would be better if you became a criminologist and exposed such offenders. Furthermore, dissolving a body is not an easy task. Consider this: a corpse is more resilient than a living person. That's why sometimes they assign tasks to the deceased that a living person cannot do. You may have heard the expression, "I work my skin off." For some, this is not just a figure of speech, but an interpretation given in a job vacancy. Auto companies avoid discussing it. You probably understand what I'm implying. It's time to reveal the hidden secrets. This is precisely what I am referring to. In crash tests, real bodies are used alongside mannequins. A dead body is sewn inside the mannequin. Previously, hundreds of corpses were used, but now only a few per year. By observing injuries to living tissue, it is possible to create more realistic mannequins and design safer vehicles. Let me reassure you in this impressive scene. No one secretly exhumes bodies from graves. In fact, individuals themselves often choose to bequeath their bodies to science, or their relatives donate their bodies after death. Besides testing machines, one can also volunteer as a guinea pig at a medical institute. allowing experiments to be conducted on tissues. Alternatively, individuals can undergo scans to create digital representations by slicing the body into 27,000 thin sections and photographing them. This innovative method has enabled scientists to develop the most detailed atlas of the human body. Susan Potter, for instance, had her body used in this manner. Future doctors can now study her anatomy in meticulous detail, examining each part in depth. If you're more interested in art than science, you can visit the Body Worlds exhibition by Gunther von Hagens, held at the largest museum of corpses. This exhibition features real human bodies that have undergone plastination, a preservation process where water is replaced with substances like silicone or polymers. Plastination prevents decomposition because without moisture, there can be no decomposition. Some individuals engage in the unethical practice of turning to body brokers who obtain bodies from relatives for free and sell them wholesale in parts. This process resembles a rather peculiar butcher shop. One man at the center of this narrative is Conrad Patrick. While his wife sees him as a whole human being, brokers see Conrad as a collection of organs. After Conrad's death, his remains were sent to 5 different destinations. His left leg was sent to an orthopedic laboratory in Chicago, his shoulder to a surgeon seminar in Las Vegas, and his head and spine to the U.S. Army. The brokers attached price tags to these body parts. Conrad's widow was deeply disturbed when she discovered that the military had used her husband's parts for explosive testing, resulting in the tragic destruction of his remains. But something else interesting here is how cheap the parts of his body were sold. $200 for some and $500 for others. It's quite strange considering that organs are typically sold for tens of thousands of dollars. This discrepancy exists because brokers are prohibited from selling whole bodies for transplantation to prevent the development of an underground market for organs. However, they are allowed to sell large pieces as raw materials for experiments. It is worth noting that approximately 58 million people pass away each year. Traditionally, most individuals are buried, resulting in the steady expansion of cemeteries. However, this poses a considerable challenge as the growing number of deceased individuals may eventually result in cemeteries occupying more land than that available for the living population. This situation prompts the need to reconsider how we utilize space more efficiently. In Santos, Brazil, a distinctive cemetery has been constructed in the form of a 32-story building. The underlying principle is simple. A 25 by 25 square plot of land can accommodate a maximum of 200 burials. However, with the construction of this 32-story building, the cemetery now has the capacity to bury up to 1,480 people, effectively utilizing the same confined space. This idea gained significance in Israel, where religious beliefs prohibit the practice of cremation, allowing only burial in the ground. After much contemplation, the rabbis devised a solution: multi-story cemeteries similar to those in Brazil, but with the inclusion of pipes filled with earth. This setup creates the illusion of the deceased being buried in the ground, while still appearing above the ground, striking a compromise with the surrounding soil. In Japan, due to limited land availability and the high cost of cemetery plots amounting to $30,000, they have developed high-tech columbariums. These columbariums consist of shelves adorned with Buddha statues, behind which lies the essence of remembrance, urns containing the ashes of loved ones. When a person presses their ID card, the Buddha statue where their loved one's urn is placed illuminates, signifying their presence, and they begin their prayers with a heartfelt connection. Furthermore, in other cemeteries, if one were to press their card, the Toyota company's special conveyor system would bring their loved one's urn from a compact storage facility. In some countries of Europe, there is a different approach to handling the deceased. After approximately 20 years from burial, families may be required to make annual payments to maintain the burial plot. Failure to pay could result in the plot being given to another deceased individual. This highlights the saying, "You lay down a little and let others lie down." Now you might be wondering, what happens to the remains if there are no living relatives? Well, in such cases, a rather unsettling practice is carried out. The bones are transferred to a specialized storage facility, often located in the underground areas of the city, such as catacombs similar to those near Paris. These catacombs house the remains of over 6 million individuals, transforming the subterranean depths into a resting place built upon bones from various eras. Construction of massive buildings above these catacombs is strictly prohibited, as it poses the risk of unintentional falls and disturbs the resting place of the ancestors. And now you'll find out the price of death. Let's say it happens to everyone at least once. When that time comes, they will take you to the morgue for free. In the simplest scenario, they'll wash you, dress you, and place you in the cheapest coffin. After this, you'll be laid to rest in the nearest cemetery, based on your registered address, where a random plot will be allocated to you. However, if you wish to have more extensive arrangements, such as embalming, transportation to the cemetery, grave digging, a headstone, and a beautiful plot in a location that won't flood in the spring, the average cost would amount to around $11,000 in the USA. But wait, there's another way. If the family wants to save themselves from this daunting task, they can hire an agent who will take care of everything for a fee of $3,000. For the same reason, older people have a tradition of saving money for their funerals instead of spending it on trips or sanatoriums to add some joy to their lives. They understand the importance of planning ahead to ensure their bodies are not laid to rest in neglected graves on the outskirts. Cremation is often considered as an alternative option. Cremation is generally more cost-effective and requires less space compared to traditional burial. However, it's important to consider the environmental impact of this process. When a body is cremated, it releases significant amounts of carbon dioxide, up to 200 kilograms, into the atmosphere. Additionally, toxic substances like mercury or dioxins may be emitted. Furthermore, the energy required for the cremation procedure can be equivalent to the energy consumption of an individual in a month. Maybe there are cleaner options available. By employing alkali and high pressure, the decay process of a body can be significantly shortened from decades to just 3 hours. This method is called resumation, which is similar to practices employed by Mexican drug dealers, but completely legal. In the end, only the bones remain, which are crushed into powder and given to relatives. However, if you prefer not to have your ashes scattered, an alternative option involves being consumed by mushrooms. To achieve this, you can request a special suit to be worn after death, one that contains a combination of mushrooms and microorganisms designed to neutralize toxic elements such as lead and mercury in our bodies. This transformation turns you into nutritious raw materials for plants. The underlying concept holds a deep philosophical meaning, representing a return to our roots, or even becoming the roots ourselves. In Australia, an innovative solution has been developed to address the challenge of burial in a cost-effective and environmentally conscious way. The concept involves burial forests encircling urban areas. These forests provide a serene setting where bodies are respectfully laid to rest in simple burials. Visitors can peacefully walk among the trees, cherishing memories of loved ones without encountering broken stones or rusted iron of graves. This approach recognizes that our bodies are borrowed from nature, acting as organic spacesuits during our time on Earth. Therefore, returning our bodies to their natural state after death seems fitting. Before the usual burial of the body, it is often embalmed using toxic formaldehyde to maintain a well-preserved appearance during the funeral. The chemistry used in embalming, including toxic formaldehyde, poisons all living things in the soil, resulting in a slowdown of the body's decay process. As a consequence, the return of organic matter to the ecosystem takes up to 50 years. In contrast, a body without coffins and chemicals naturally decomposes, allowing for the swift return of all useful substances to nature in approximately 2 years. Death is an inevitable part of life, just like childhood or adulthood. The Aztecs understood this concept and depicted it in their statues. These statues are beautifully crafted from the front, but they feature a figure of death on the back. This symbolism highlights the constant presence of death in our lives, always lurking behind us.